In my previous video, I showed some high-level information about our recent IAT temps over speed on a route from Central Florida to Tennessee. One of the things I want to do is zoom in on this last leg of the trip, and which is this data right here, and look at a closer view of what some of the actual numbers were in that data. So last leg right here to here is from the Bass Pro Shop, just north of Atlanta, up into Tennessee. Some of the things we'll be looking at were coming into Chattanooga in the construction zone. This is around 80 miles into the trip. And then also climbing the mountain to Monteagle, which is about 124 or 5 miles into the trip. You can see this is a fairly steep section of interstate where they have a runaway truck ramp, 2 runaway truck ramps on the side that's coming down. We were climbing up and then descending on the other side. So the data on this stretch through here is pretty important because we were climbing a 6% grade for several miles. So let's look at where that is on the data, and then we'll talk more about it. One thing that stands out is right here. This is actually a fuel stop. You can see our speed, which is in orange, drops to 0. We fill up the tank, and then we carry on. This was between Chattanooga and the mountain climb. And the actual mountain climb itself is this section right here. Climbing and then descending is all of this. You can see where our speed drops to 0. This was where we merged off the interstate at the first exit immediately after the descent from the mountain. And we set our cruise control going up. We got a little bit faster at the peak on that flat section, and then I slowed down to descend and just kind of slowly let our speed come up a mile an hour or 2 on the Jake brake. So let's get into the actual chart with all of the numbers, and we can look at what all of these actual values are and what our IAT does under various conditions. I also wanted to point out there was a section where I turned on our fan override, and that is right here. When we come into the Chattanooga slowdown of the downtown Chattanooga area, I flipped it on, and it's very clear that in the really cold temperatures, well, cold temperatures we were running, it really made no difference in our coolant and oil temps. They stayed almost exactly the same, and that makes sense because we were pretty much opening and closing the thermostats, which is I think why the coolant flutters a little bit more and the oil's a little bit smoother. Oil's not really, there's no thermostat control on that. It just, you know, pretty much has a smooth temperature scaling on it. The one thing the fan did make a big difference though is that it dropped our transmission temperature quite a bit, and that makes sense because the transmission cooler is part of the stack there that the hydraulic fan cools down. So that's what fan override looks like. It really made no difference on these 2 temps. And let's look at the IAT now. IAT was pretty steady state along with our speed, and then we sped up a little bit. I'm assuming, oh yeah, I remember this was a merge. I had to get up to pretty good speed to cut over to get into the right lane, to then get into all the stop and go traffic, or slowdowns in the traffic of the construction site, even in the early morning of Chattanooga. So flipping on the fan override really made no difference when you're at these higher speeds with the charge air IAT numbers. And it in fact didn't even make too much of a difference when we slowed down again. I think this rise, even with fan override on, is the same thing that I was seeing with fan override off in previous parts of the trip. So to zoom in on this, this is the last leg of the trip that corresponds with that. And this is the IAT spike that we were just looking at. You can see that spike is a very similar phenomenon in all of the other slowdowns that we encountered on the drive without fan override on. So let's look at what those actual numbers are, and we can see what's happening in the data. This shows our miles, and obviously that flatlined as we stopped for a fuel fill up. You can see as we start really pumping the fuel here, the fuel temp comes down. The ambient we're going to throw out because we've come to learn that our ambient is not actually representative of the actual ambient. It's somewhere where it's being exposed to other heat. But what we're really caring about right now is the IAT, and it's labeled as manifold temp here. So with the fan override on, we saw it make a difference on the transmission temperature. It still allowed our charge air to get all the way up to 83, 84 degrees for an extended period of time. You can see from this fuel stop, these are minutes of data. These are minutes right here on the x-axis, minutes of data logging, and you can see we were stopped for, I mean, nearly 20 minutes, probably 15 minutes to fuel up. And in that period of time, our IAT climbed to 80 degrees, and it got down to 70. Before then, we started, merging back onto the interstate. This was pulling out of the truck stop, and then on ramp, and then this is merging back on, and you can see it spikes up a little bit again there as we pull out of the fuel station. So even in that extended fuel stop, our fan in fan override was not able to fully cool our manifold temp to what it does at steady state once we were rolling again back on the interstate again. Once we got up to the 66 miles an hour and our RPM was up again, that's when our manifold temp dropped. Now, that is actually important to know, because this section here is where we started climbing the mountain. I threw the cruise control onto 55, which is represented as 54 here in our data, and we got into a state where despite traveling at 55 miles an hour, our manifold temp climbed and climbed and climbed as we climbed the mountain. And it peaked at 75 before we then pulled off the throttle as we hit the top of the mountain. I think our speed increased 5 or 6 miles an hour as we hit that flat section at the top. And then you can clearly see the IAT drops again now that we're off the throttle on the jakes, and I set the cruise at, well, I wasn't running cruise. I set our speed to 50, and then we rode the jakes all the way down the mountain and achieved a speed of like 60 miles an hour before we then took the first exit off the interstate. So it's pretty clear here that the manifold temp was climbing. It wasn't showing any signs of slowing down in the climb, and I wonder if we were going up a 5,000, 10,000 foot climb, how much higher it would have gotten. And it's important to remember too, as we were going up the mountain, the temperature was dropping. We were well below freezing by the time we got to the top, and so despite the lowering of the ambient, the manifold was rising at a pretty good rate. It's also worth noting too here, when we slow down again, coming into our neighborhood, here's our speed slowing down. Here it goes again. Our manifold temp just keeps climbing and climbing, and it gets back up to 85 degrees in 30-something degree weather. So that 50 degree temp delta, I don't love it. It's not bad, but I think we can do better. So I hope this is helpful in covering what happens on fan override, and I would love if it made more of a difference, particularly right here when we came to the fuel stop, but I think the engine RPM is just low enough where it's not able to achieve the same performance that it does even when we're running at 63 miles an hour, and immediately it starts cooling it to the temperature we need it to be, which is about 30 degrees over ambient. It seems to be the steady state. This was 30 degree weather here, and our manifold temp was holding pretty steady at 60 in the 30-something degree temperatures of the early Georgia morning, and that was at a steady state 70 miles per hour on cruise control. Hope this was helpful. Any questions, let me know. I'm happy to zoom in on any more of the information or provide more data around the scenarios and what we saw and what I'm hoping to improve upon with a pretty major change in our charge air cooling system. Thank you for watching.